Today on The Critical Gentleman, we take an in-depth look at the iconic Breitling Navitimer. The Breitling Navitimer has been around since 1952 and has earned a reputation both as an instrument of aviation as well as a fantastic watch for discerning collectors. The first Navitimer was an evolution of Breitling's Chronomat, a watch that was released in 1942 and introduced the idea of a slide rule bezel that would allow pilots to make calculations in flight very quickly. This tool quickly became popular in the aviation community and found a home on the wrists of pilots all over the world. The success of this watch has carried it all the way into the 21st century, where it continues to find a home on the wrists of watch collectors and pilots alike. Now, this review will cover a few of the different Navitimers that have come out over the years, but we'll probably focus mostly on my personal Navitimer, which is the reference A322, also known as the Navitimer 92. Now, this watch was released in 1992 for the 50th anniversary of the Breitling Chronomat. Now, because the Navitimer has been around for so long, there have been many different iterations, sizes, calibers, and complications that have existed on this watch. Of course, the two things that are never absent from the Navitimer are a chronograph of some kind, and of course the slide rule bezel. The things that tend to come and go are complications like flyback, date function, sometimes even split seconds. And so in order to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Chronomat, Breitling's first really successful pilot watch, they released this watch, the Breitling Navitimer 92. At the time, heritage-inspired watches weren't as popular as they are right now, but that is still, of course, what this is. It is a heritage watch. It is inspired by an original vintage piece. What I personally like about this watch is the size. It is modestly sized at 38 millimeters, which I believe was the original size of the Chronomat. However, the Navitimer in 1952 was a bit bigger at 40 millimeters. Now, of course, again, over the years, the Breitling Navitimer has been produced everywhere in between 38 and 46 millimeters. I mean, you've got 40, 41, 43, 45, 46. Pretty much any size you want, you can find a Navitimer in that size. As I've said in earlier videos, I have small wrists. I prefer smaller watches. 38 millimeters, I think, is the perfect size for almost any gentleman's watch, but I think particularly for me. Now, another thing that changes depending on the reference of the Navitimer is the movement. Now, when the Navitimer first came out in 1952, it used the Valjoux 72 manual wind movement, which is the same movement found in the Heuer Carrera. After a while, Breitling began to use the Venus 178, another manually wound chronograph movement, but again, when they stopped production of that movement, Breitling went to other options. Eventually, they settled predominantly on the Valjoux 7750, a very popular, ubiquitous workhorse movement that almost every watch manufacturer has used at some point. In their smaller watches, such as this 38mm Navitimer, they actually went with a different ETA movement, the 2892, which is just an automatic three-handed time-only movement, but with a chronograph module. Now, I mentioned this in my watch collection overview, but if you turn this watch sideways, you can see that the pushers in the crown are not in the same horizontal plane. That's because the chronograph module sits on top of the watch movement itself, and therefore the crown is placed lower in the watch case than the pushers. In terms of case material, the Navitimers have come in an array of cases. Originally they were steel, but there are models out there in yellow gold, red gold, two-tone as well. In fact, this watch right here came in both of those configurations, steel, gold, and two-tone. I've never actually seen a solid gold one, but apparently they exist. And, of course, there is no shortage of different dial configurations for the Navitimer. They come in white, black, blue, with applied markers, with Arabic numeral markers. And then, of course, you've got the other models with different markers altogether, such as the Cosmonaut, which uses a 24-hour movement. In fact, that model uses the Lemania 1877, which is a modified 1873, so that the watch hands only circle the dial once every 24 hours. It is a 24-hour military watch. And in fact, in a way, that is a watch that is most authentic to the original Breitling 806 because it still uses a manual wind movement, whereas many of the other ones have since been upgraded to an automatic. Just now for 2017, Breitling has actually announced a new split seconds chronograph using a in-house split seconds movement, which is a really, really cool introduction. They've recently created their own Breitling B01 movement, which is an in-house column wheel chronograph that they're now putting into their Navitimer 01. This is new as of 2012, I believe. So for a period there, they were using almost exclusively Etta Valjoux movements, but now they've moved on to their own in-house movement, which I think in a lot of collectors' eyes has brought Breitling back up into the really higher end watch category. For a while, they were almost on the same level as Tag Heuer, except more expensive. And what I mean by that is that they were viewed as a Swiss brand that used off-the-shelf production Etta movements in watches that they were charging $5,000 for, which a lot of people view as not great value per dollar. Now, with their in-house movement being put into the Navitimer, I think you could make the argument that they're stepping up their game. They're really bringing the quality of the watch up to the price point. So rather than lower their price and try to access a different demographic without changing their product, instead they're improving their product so that the demographic meets the price point. I think that's a really interesting choice to make. I don't necessarily disagree or agree with it. It's simply where they've chosen to go. But I think in terms of trying to solidify their market segment, Breitling clearly has made their choice, and I think it's working out for them because they've had a lot of really exciting releases this year in Basel, and I think that people will start seeing more and more Breitlings being respected among collector circles and hopefully being purchased in general. So let's go back to the Navitimer for just a second and take a look at some of the details here. So let's talk about this slide rule. The slide rule on this particular Navitimer is actually a heritage slide rule. And what I mean by that is that it's an inverted slide rule and what they call a base 10 slide rule. So this is the same bezel that was used on the 1942 Chronomet, not the 1952 Navitimer. And in order to do calculations with this, it's a little bit of a different process than with any other Navitimer. Another interesting thing that I really like about this watch is the dial. Of course, not every Breitling Navitimer is going to have a sunburst blue dial on it, but this one does, and it is by far my favorite feature of the watch. I think this in particular is what makes this piece the crowning jewel of my collection at the moment. I have a couple of really cool watches, but I think this is one that I would never get rid of. I think it's got a really elegant feel to it that a lot of other Navitimers lack due to the busyness and the complexity of their dials and slide rules. As you can see, it's got a 3-register chronograph no date function, which I actually think is a good thing. Of course, another consideration is that my Navitimer has a printed logo as opposed to the applied logo that's finding its way onto Breitling watches today. I think if you're trying to decide between a pre-owned Breitling Navitimer from 2007 and a brand new retail Navitimer from 2017, you've got a much more difficult choice because you're going to save so much money buying pre-owned that it's almost worth it, even if the fact is you have to live with an Etta movement. Is it as special or unique or collectible or as high-end as an in-house movement? No. That's the thing. It's not exclusive. But function, robustness, reliability, ability to be serviced, Etta's even got an edge above other manufacturers when you're talking about ease of service. Trying to find a watchmaker to service your Longuet movement, good luck with that. Anyway, let's get back on track for a second. I think that the Breitling Navitimer is an iconic watch. It's been around for the better part of a century at this point, and even though it has somewhat of a polarizing design and aesthetic, if it is a watch that you like, that you think is beautiful, or that you think you would enjoy wearing, I can certainly recommend the purchase of a Breitling Navitimer. They are a little bit pricey, but the Navitimer today actually, I think, represents a better value than in past decades due to their new in-house movement that brings it really up into the in-house luxury tier. It comes in sizes that will look good on almost any wrist. I think the current production models are your choice of 43 or 46 millimeters, so still sort of on the big side. Of course, you can still find them in 38, 40, 41, so those are a little bit more accessible. But in general, I would always advocate buying pre-owned anyway, so you're going to get a better deal on the secondary market than you will buying retail. Anyway, that's my brief history and overview of the Breitling Navitimer. Let me know what you think. Please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And come back on Friday for Top 5 Day. Thanks for watching The Critical Gentleman.